Welcome everybody to today's episode of the Conscious Grief series. I'm very honored to be here with Susan Hannifin-MacNab. Susan is a social worker, an educator, and an author of the book A to Z Healing Toolbox, which we are going to talk about more today. So thank you very, very much for being here, and it's so wonderful to meet you.
Thanks for having me, Tara. I really appreciate being here and being invited.
Yes, of course. And we were just talking about our mutual friend, Casey Gaunt, who I'm very grateful who introduced us. So
yes, I can't wait to hear what Casey has to say.
I know. So I like to begin the interviews because everybody has their own sort of interpretation and, you know, often very personal definition of grief. So what would be your definition of grief, Susan?
Well, my definition is simply that grief is in relationship to love, and that grief is a normal and natural reaction to a loss of any kind. Grief can also be wild and messy and unpredictable, and it can affect us in so many different ways: physically, spiritually, emotionally, behaviorally, and socially. So it's a myriad of feelings, and it does not happen in a one-step process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I mentioned as I introduced you that you wrote a book. And for people that are not familiar with your work, could you explain what led you to writing this book?
Sure. Well, first I'll show the book so people know what it looks like. It's A to Z or A to Z Healing Toolbox, a practical guide for navigating grief and trauma with intention. And I honestly had no intention of writing a book. I was happy being an educator and a social worker. I did that for 20 plus years. But my husband died suddenly in a car accident, was missing for 2 weeks before we knew what had actually happened. So I knew that I needed to, in helping myself and our 5-year-old son, at some point I wanted to reach back and help others. That's the social worker in me. So as I gathered resources in the San Diego community where I live, one single small step at a time, I started categorizing all of my resources because I'm a teacher type. So all the binders you see back here, one of them is my original binder that had A for animals. Why do animals help us in healing? B for breath work. How can I learn to rebreathe again? C for counseling and all the various types of therapy that is out there for us when we're in a grief or trauma situation. And so those resources got compiled into a folder. And not until I presented that information at a wonderful conference I never wanted to be at called Camp Widow, run by Soaring Spirits International, did that group of attendees at the workshop say, "Where did you get this information? And we need it. And please put this into a book." And I said, "You've got to be kidding me. I'm not writing a book." But eventually the book came, and now it's been out for a few years and helping thousands of people.
And it's such a great name because you know, we do want tools. We often talk about tools in relation to self-development, self-help. And so, you know, having a book that really guides people through all these different modalities of healing. And a lot of people probably have not heard of certain things. I mean, you're in San Diego, which is like the mecca of self-help, I would say. So you have your fingertips are on the pulse of many modalities.
You know, it's true. There are many things here to help people with grief and trauma healing. However, even though I was a social worker, I had no clue where to start. I had a dead husband, a traumatized child, a traumatized self. And for decades, I'd been helping other people grab resources, but I had never turned that to me and my child. So that's what I did. And I knew about some of the modalities, various types of therapy and counseling, because I was a social worker, but there were plenty of others that I had never dived into. Meditation was definitely not something that I did. Nutrition and healthy eating was never something I dove into, as far as, what do these things do for humans physiologically? I never looked at that. The power of gratitude, which is such a buzzword now, but there is so much research backing all of these different tools. And that's what I wanted to put out for people. And the book really, has 28 chapters, so 26 letters of the alphabet, and then a grief chapter and a trauma chapter. And many people just wake up and they open it blindly to any chapter, any page. It's not a book that you need to read from the beginning to the end in order. Similarly to grief, you can start anywhere, just start somewhere.
Wow, thank you so much. It's very interesting as well to know that your background as a social worker, and because obviously you have a heart for helping people and for helping people heal. And when we experience the death of a loved one and that grief and that trauma, it's sort of the catalyst of, like you were saying, you've been in this field of work, but you didn't maybe necessarily kind of have the experience of the grief and the trauma that you experienced when your husband died.
Exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up, because as a graduate student, I read a book about grief and I thought I knew what that was. And then my own personal experience hit me like a ton of rocks. And none of that made sense to me. The model of lovely and dear Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the 5 stages of grief and loss. Well, actually, her model is for people who are dying, not people who have survived a death. So the orderly, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, that is not the order of grievers. That is the order of people who are dying and grieving their own death. But for survivors, my friend Tom Zuba, who wrote the foreword to my book, he's famous for saying, grief is all over the place. It's messy and unpredictable and wild and crazy. And we're going to be in a different place every minute of the day sometimes. So not until I experienced grief myself did I actually understand the scope and the breadth of it.
Yeah. And there is something that unites us with other people who have been in a similar, position.
Yes. And I really love talking about the theory of post-traumatic growth, in addition to the post-traumatic stress that a lot of us have after our person dies. There's a lot of research on post-traumatic growth, which is the flip side of post-traumatic stress. And there are 5 areas of oasis, I call them, in that growth. And the first one is opportunities. New opportunities arise from the experience. And I know for me, and maybe for you too, Tara, so many experiences, so many opportunities, so many new people to meet through this experience. And yes, I would take Brent back in a heartbeat. However, that can't happen. And in addition to that, I have an amazing network of close friends, colleagues, and I can really just go there. We mentioned Casey Gaunt. He and I have become really connected over the last couple of years because his son died and my husband died, and that automatically is a bonding experience. So I feel like I know his family and he feels like he knows mine, because it's an automatic bond with others who have lost someone.
Mm-hmm. Actually, can you tell us a little bit more about the post-traumatic growth, the other
Sure.
four?
Sure, I would love to. I love talking about it because when I came upon this research, it really gave me hope that maybe somehow I could thrive again, not just survive 1 second at a time, which is always what it is at the beginning. 1 second. Okay, now I'm going to do this minute. Okay, now I'm going to do an hour. And now, almost 9 years later, I could look a week, a month, maybe a year in advance. But as far as the post-traumatic growth, there are 5 areas of growth that can come out of a grief or trauma experience. And I like the acronym OASIS. So the first growth area is opportunity. New opportunities arise. Like this summit that you're doing is an amazing opportunity for you, for me, and everyone listening. Mm-hmm. The A is appreciation. So oftentimes there's a greater appreciation for people in our lives, for things in our lives that we maybe didn't see or appreciate as much before. For instance, I've always loved nature, but a couple of years ago in San Diego, there was a mass birthing of butterflies. They were everywhere in this city, and that has never happened before. So I would just pull the car over and my son and I would just sit and watch these butterflies. That is never something I would do. I would have done when Brent was here because I was too busy getting on to the next thing. So that's a small example of appreciation. So that's opportunity, appreciation, strength is S, inner strength. I have survived this. I can do anything. I can put together a grief summit. I can write a book at age 42. I can do whatever it is I need to get done. Then the I is interpersonal relationships. And oftentimes, like my relationship with Casey and his family, my meeting you, my introduction to Claire Bidwell Smith, these are interpersonal relationships that have become stronger with total strangers, really. So that can happen, and that's a lovely benefit. Then the last S is spirituality. And oftentimes people in the post-traumatic growth stage of healing, they either go deeper into their spirituality or their religious life that they had before, or it's completely changed in a new way. And all of that is normal, and all of that is just a wonderful deepening of our own self that only comes after the trauma or the grief, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know, it's so fascinating of this post-traumatic growth. It's actually something that I've been really only introduced to during this series, and because Hope Edelman talked about it a little bit as well, and I just think about sort of, my seeking always and thinking about why I'm here, where I'm going, and only it's since I've become older that I felt more normal in that.
Yes.
But I was curious as well to talk to you because as being an educator, a social worker, very enlightened mother and woman, because your son was obviously young when his dad died, and I hadn't got that much experience around talking to children about bereavement. I was 9 when my dad died, and obviously that's quite a long time ago now, so things have really developed and really changed. But I would love to hear from you about how you communicated with your son about the loss of his father.
It's a great question. And I do not claim to be the professional expert in grief and loss for children. I have my personal experience, and I do a lot of work with families who are affiliated with Soaring Spirits International, which is the global support community for the widowed folks. But I always refer families to the National Alliance for Grieving Children, which is a wonderful network of support. But personally, my son was 5, and 5-year-olds don't really understand the permanency of death. So he was right on the edge of, is he coming back, or did he go to sleep? Or he didn't really understand that at age 5. Over time, he has understood that, obviously, because dad has not been here for almost 9 years now. But what happened with him is that his behavior and his grief and trauma came out behaviorally more in a reaction to watching me fall apart completely and the people around me. So it's often said that children are barometers for, they read the room, they read people's emotions, they are the barometers for what's happening experientially. And so I got both of us into therapy. I was a teacher to begin with, as I mentioned. So I had lots of decades of working with children of all ages, and I knew that all children need structure. And so I gave that to him. We had a whiteboard in our home that listed everything that was going to happen during the day, meals, school, brush your teeth, read a book, go to bed, because he needed structure and consistency, and to know that, okay, that happened with dad, but we are okay, and everything else is going to fall in line. And so, and really, I just made sure too that we had support around us. And the biggest advice I would give to anyone who says, what would you advise others to do who are in this type of predicament, is to ask for help. And that's one area that I think the Western world does a real disservice to everyone in the population. We are supposed to pick ourselves up and do it ourselves and be independent. But my years of living in Hawaii, which is a very interdependent island culture, taught me that that's not the way to go, that we are all supposed to be in community and healing in community. And so I really just asked people for help, and they gave it. And that's also what my son needed, to have that consistency.
Wow, I know it's so true that it is very, very hard to ask for help. It's a skill, actually, to ask.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it gets better over time. I mean, as I mentioned, I was really good about telling other people that these are the resources they could use to get help. And then I would expect them to do that, right? But then when it was my turn to run after resources, I just had to throw the notion of doing it myself out the door, because this situation was way too big for me to handle on my own. Not to mention, just me, but then I had a 5-year-old to help. So there was no way to deal with grief and trauma and 2 people on my own. And so I've gotten really good over the years at asking for help, and then also accepting it when it comes, because often people will say to us, well, what can I do? Or, can I pick up the groceries, or can I shuffle your child somewhere? And we think, well, we still have to do it all. And so now I say, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And how about next Tuesday also?
Very, very wise words. Yeah. I'm so glad you shared that, because it helps give everyone else permission to do the same. And, when somebody offers something, that we can say yes and receive that and be grateful. And it was interesting to hear you talk about gratitude in relation to grief.
Gratitude, that word is such a buzzword now. And I have to say that I was so angry for so long. And I think anger is something that we also don't allow in our culture. We're supposed to bottle it up and pretend nice and be okay with it all, because we get 2 weeks to grieve and then we have to go back to work. And certainly after 365 days, we should be all done grieving, right?
Mhm.
So I was angry for a long, long time. And that hindered me from being grateful about anything. It allowed me to move, right? Keep moving forward, because anger is an outward expression, right? Depression is inward. I was not depressed, I was livid. And so I was able to get out the door and just run all over the city looking for ways that we could be helped. And actually, one of my lovely friends and mentors, who's about 25 years older than me, she's kind of a bright light and has always been a bright light in my world, um, a teacher and a very spiritual human. She came over about a year after Brent died and suggested that I keep a gratitude journal. And I walked her out to the door after we had dinner, and I did not invite her back for about 2 years. I was so incensed that she even bring up gratitude. I mean, here I was a solo parent suddenly, and my husband is dead. What do I have to be thankful for? But eventually, there's a chapter in the book about it's letter X, which is examining your positives. And not until I got to that place and I got past some of the anger, and I took my son and all of my husband's clothes and we brought them down to Mexico over the border. And I sat in a home with a dirt floor with garage doors as walls and no indoor plumbing. Did I say, oh my gosh, I am so thankful. I have indoor plumbing. I have heat. I have a beach 10 minutes from me. I have food. You know, that was a wake up call. And then I started diving into, what is this gratitude thing? And is there really, really backing or research behind it? Or is it just something people are talking about because we should be? And I found there's so much research on the power of intentional gratitude. And I love this summit title, Conscious Grief. It's very similar to what I call intention, right? Consciously or intentionally grieving and moving through the process instead of avoiding it.
Well, I'm so glad that you talked about the anger that you had and your reaction to this gratitude idea, because I sometimes feel, you know, for people who are watching these, who are in deep grief right now and really, you know, feeling a lot of pain, that yes, trying to find something you're grateful for is not what you want to be doing in that moment. And I really always want to encourage people not to sort of be bypassing their grief and be like, oh, well, like there are these, you know, this is A to Z and I want to get to Z and I want to be the positive person and be grateful, because it really is a journey and a process, and it can take a lot of time and a lot of perspective to get to that stage, as you have just described.
Yes. You know, I have a kind of a funny story, interesting story about the anger piece. I was invited to go on a grief healing retreat in Ojai, California. So it was about 2 years after Brent died. 1.5 to 2 years. So by that time, I should be all healed, right? No, of course not. I was still livid and trying to figure out, how do I rebuild a life and raise this child? I was angry at Brent, angry at God, angry at couples I saw together who were my age and still married. I mean, I was like daggers. I was so angry. And so I decided, okay, fine, I'll go on this grief healing retreat. And it was with Claire Bidwell Smith and a woman who was a grief therapist and yoga practitioner. And we each had some time with Claire to do a one-on-one during the retreat. And I just remember sitting there with my arms crossed, like, I don't even know why I'm here. And I'm so livid. And she could see that. And it was normal. And she just let me know that I was in a normal place. Validation is huge. So getting validated that anger is part of this show and it's okay to be there. Then about 2 years later, I went on another grief healing retreat with Claire, and she said, wow, you're in a different space now. You're not so angry. Not that the anger was, not good. It had to happen, but she could see over those 2 years of those retreats that I had come a long way because I was working on all the different aspects of my new life.
Really amazing. And it was really reassuring to hear that you continue to do these retreats, and give yourself that time and that space, and that you didn't think, oh, I don't want to do these stupid retreats anymore. You kind of stuck.
That's right. I am such a huge believer in healing in community. And I was never a super, let's do all this in community. I was on sports teams with community, right? But I was never, let's sit in a circle and kumbaya and heal together kind of person. I was very tomboy and hanging with the boys. And not until Brent died was I forced into community in a big way. And the biggest community I'm involved with now is called the Soaring Spirits International. It's a global community for the widowed population. And I'm now their programs and education manager because I believe so much in the power of community. And we have 3 conferences a year and more coming, called Camp Widow. And 40% of the people who return year after year after year are alumni. So widowed people from 4 or 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, their loss was, and they keep coming back. Why? Because we always need community. We always need people to understand us. And we need friendships that have come out of this place. And so that's a pretty big number. Almost half of the people who come back 3 times a year are widowed years ago. It doesn't just go away.
I love that. And I completely agree. Community is so powerful. And when people can, I always say, we're all teachers for one another. And it's so powerful to be listening to other people because you don't feel so alone, because you think, oh wow, she feels the same or he feels the same. And you just learn a lot, really.
Yes, I love the power of the story, right? So there's the story, and I had to tell my story over and over and over again for a while. And then I got to a place of, okay, it's like a car. My son, who's now 14, loves vehicles. And in the car, right, we have a huge windshield. So we can see where we're headed. We have a small rear view mirror. So I like to talk about the past, the story now, 20% of the time. And then the 80 is where I'm going, and who's coming with me and what are we going to do? And so I'm not so stuck in the story, because at some point I had to get out of that. I had to step out and look at the huge mirror, the huge window in front of me, and decide, where do I want to go? And this is an intentional journey. I get to rebuild my life. How do I want that to look? Who do I want to be in that life with me?
Yeah. And I was just thinking about your S of your oasis and how that's shifted and changed.
The spirituality.
Yeah, the spirituality.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I can speak to that. I grew up Catholic and I gave retreats. I went to Christian universities. I was very clear on who God was and where I fit into the scheme of things. Well, when my husband went out for a drive and never returned, I'm sorry, but all of that went away. I stopped believing in God. I stopped believing in an order. I just threw everything in the toilet. I couldn't do it anymore. And someone gave me a wonderful book written by a theology professor. His name is Jerry Sitzer, and his book is called A Grace Disguised: How the Soul Grows Through Loss. And this man, who probably never intended to write this book either, he's a theology professor in the state of Washington, and his family was in a car, his 4 children, his wife, and his mother, and a drunk driver hit their van. And in one accident, his mother, his wife, and 1 child died. So here's a theology professor who 3 family members have died in this traumatic incident. Okay, if he can do this healing thing and reorder his world with God, then I've got to be able to do this. And I'm going to do this. And so I read that book probably 10 times, and I've highlighted things and underlined, and the pages are dog-eared. And I had to get stripped of everything I thought, just like he did, and rebuild my spirituality. And so for me now, a religious, ordered, structured environment does not work for me. I have my own spiritual sense that doesn't include the Catholic Church, although I appreciate I had it as a child. And my son is now involved in that community. But for me, it doesn't work. And I have a much deeper relationship with God now than I ever did in the past, because it doesn't include, interestingly enough, it doesn't include the community piece. It's me directly with him directly. And that's what's happened for me.
Yeah, so interesting. So interesting, because like you're saying, this subject of grief, it is deep, and we go to those deepest places of ourselves, and that's what makes it such an interesting topic.
Yes. And actually, on one of these retreats I went on with Claire. Hi, Claire, if you're watching. We were all sitting around one evening. I think Claire was probably there, but the question of the evening was, where are you spiritually? I mean, did you ever believe in God? Do you believe in God now? Where do you think our people are? Where are we going? And this second retreat I went on with her was co-facilitated by Claire and Fleur, who's a medium. And so the conversation was about the afterlife, spirituality. Where are our people? Like, where do they go? And we went around, and I realized, after hearing everybody else who was in disbelief or non-believing places, that I believed in God still, but I was livid. I was so mad. It was almost like being super angry at your father or your mother, a parental figure. It's like, I know you're there, but I am pissed off. Mm-hmm. And that was one of my first aha. Okay, so I still believe, it's just things are moving and switching and turning and changing. And that's okay. I had to learn to lean into the discomfort and lean into things that were out of my realm. And now these things are in my realm, and it's much easier over time to lean into the discomfort of whatever emotion it is that I may be feeling.
Yeah, because also in the grief of losing, a person, a loved one, there's all these other griefs that go with it. And, for you, that was your sort of, your foundation of what you had grown up with and believed in. There was a constructing of that. And like you're saying, sort of stepping into this unknown of not knowing.
Yes.
Necessarily. Yeah.
One reason there are 28 chapters in my book is because I needed to have one chapter dedicated to grief. What is it? What does it look like? And there's a chart in the book. Grab a pencil, circle all the common grief reactions for you. Behaviorally, spiritually, socially, emotionally, physically, we are changed forever and altered. And so I have people in my workshops get out a pencil. Okay, everybody, we're going to circle these, and this is normal. Or in my live workshops, I have printed out all the common grief reactions, 50 something grief reactions, and printed on these 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. And I spread them all over the floor. And then everyone gets a little bag of bingo chips. And I say, okay, we're going to walk around silently, just drop a chip silently on whatever reactions are true for you. 5 minutes later, there are bingo chips covering the floor, covering the papers, and we gather in a circle around that. And we just look, are we alone in how we feel? Is this normal? No, we're not alone. Look at all the people feeling this way. And yes, this is normal. It doesn't feel good at all, but we will get through it if we keep leaning into it, which is the hardest part.
It is hard because we don't want to feel the uncomfortable and the painful. But that's why I guess that's why it's something we need to talk about more and more, because of the benefits of leaning into it outweigh the dealing with it in the unconscious way.
Right. And I also, if there's one thing I've learned about grief, my own, and working with thousands of other grieving parents and siblings and spouses and children, it's that, there is no timeline for this grief thing. And this is an ongoing way we become in the world. We grieve and we heal, and we grieve and we heal more, and we keep healing as we go. So recently I've met two individuals who, a man and a woman, both lost their spouses over a decade ago, and they boxed it up, the grief, as well as they could. And they ran and they traveled and they had relationships and they did all the different things. A decade later, they come to Soaring Spirits International and say, I'm ready now. I'm ready now to lean in. And that's a decade later. So it's just, there is no timeline for it. For me, I'm not a box person. I cannot box it up. It was impossible. It just spilled out and over into every part of my life, out of every pore of my body. So I had to survive it and keep going and going and going, leaning into all the craziness of it. And now 9 years later, almost, I can say I'm not so crazy. My brother may beg to differ.
Well, we recognize, that we're not crazy. Yeah. Like you're saying, it's normalizing when we think we're crazy, because that's what grief does to us, doesn't it?
Yes, we definitely feel like we're going crazy. And I felt like that and actually voiced that. I feel like I'm going crazy. And then I took a look at this list of common grief reactions and went, oh, I'm not going crazy. This is normal. I feel crazy. Like I feel like I can't control anything. And my emotions are all over the map, but this is indeed normal, and it won't be like that forever. The waves of grief will spread out over time. And that's one analogy that we talk about here in San Diego, because we have the ocean so close to us. Initially grief is waves just coming and coming and coming and coming, and we feel like we can't step into the water at all because we keep getting knocked down. And then over time and conscious intentional work, we see, oh, wow, the next wave isn't for a while. Okay, I can stand here. That one comes, maybe it knocks us down, maybe it just makes us off kilter or off balance for a while. And then the next one is way out there even further. So that's one analogy for people to grab onto also, that the waves won't be so constant and completely knock you down over time and work. I actually like the ocean now, and it took me a long time to get back into it.
Oh, I love that analogy. It's so helpful. Thank you, Susan. Oh, Susan, I feel like I could talk to you for a long, long time.
So much to say, right?
So much to say, so much helpful wisdom from you. It's just been such an honor to talk to you. And I'm so
Well,
glad.
thanks so much for having me.
No, it's just wonderful. It's wonderful to hear everything and hear you speak about Claire's work. You know, as we both know, she is really like an incredible teacher of this subject, very profound. And so I will definitely make sure she knows to tune in to your interview.
That's right. We're talking about Claire and Casey here today.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I think that's it. I mean, the last thing would just be to, as I mentioned, Claire and Casey, just find your people. And we are really all interconnected, professionally, personally, with our grief stories. I feel like as you heal, I heal. And as Claire heals, you heal. And as I heal, Casey heals. I mean, we're all doing this work together. So I would just encourage people to find those who speak to you, who can help guide you along, reach up for help and then reach back and help those who are coming behind you.
Gorgeous. I love that. What a powerful place to finish. Thank you again so, so much for being here. It has been such a pleasure.
You're so welcome.